Margaret smoothed the wrinkles on her navy blue dress, running her hands over the fabric even though it was already perfectly neat. This was her go-to dress, the one she always wore to family dinners. Not too fancy, so her daughter-in-law Patricia wouldn't roll her eyes, but not too casual, so she wouldn't look unkempt. At 77, she had long stopped chasing fashion trends, but she remained accustomed to being well-groomed. A lifetime habit, even when there was no one to impress. Anthony had said dinner would start at 7. It was only 6. She walked around her room, which felt like a museum of her life. A photograph from her golden wedding anniversary with Alexander. Little Anthony with the first fish he'd caught himself, Eric and Lisa at their graduations. These pictures reminded her that once everything had been different, warmer, more meaningful. Her gaze lingered on Alexander's photograph. He'd been gone 20 years, but she still consulted with him in her mind. "Margaret, don't let anyone walk all over you," he used to say. He knew how to set boundaries, even with Anthony, but she never could. Her phone buzzed. A message from Anthony. She put on her reading glasses, thinking perhaps he was confirming the time or offering to pick her up, though he hadn't offered that in years. "Mum, sorry, can't do tonight. Patricia arranged a dinner for colleagues. We'll reschedule." She stared at the message. Yesterday he had insisted she must come, said there would be important news. Something wasn't right here. Margaret's fingers trembled slightly as she dialed Anthony's number. He answered on the third ring. "Hi, Mum." "Anthony, honey, what happened? Yesterday you said it was so important that I come tonight. You said you had news." "Oh, well, you know how it is. Patricia's boss called this morning and we had to—" In the background, Margaret heard Patricia's whisper, sharp and urgent. "Anthony, whatever you do, keep her away tonight. I don't want to see her. Tell her whatever you have to tell her, but don't let her come here." ... The phone trembled in her hands, as if someone had doused her with ice water. She whispered goodbye and hung up, then slowly sank into her armchair, feeling as though the floor had shifted beneath her feet. Memories cascaded through her mind like photographs scattered by wind. Anthony clinging to her skirt on his first day of daycare, tears streaming down his chubby cheeks. The shy 10-year-old asking for advice about what gift to give Sarah Miller for Valentine's Day, his face flushed with embarrassment. The proud young man bringing Patricia home to meet the family for the first time, his eyes bright with love and hope. And now this. Was this a spontaneous decision born from Patricia's work stress, or had they finally voiced what they'd been thinking for years? Margaret shook her head, trying to dispel the spiral of doubt. Perhaps she was overthinking this, making mountains out of molehills, as Alexander used to say. What if they were genuinely in some kind of trouble? What if Anthony's evasiveness meant something serious had happened? The responsible thing to do was find out what was really going on. 20 minutes later, she found herself sitting in her car across the street from Anthony's house, her heart pounding. Dusk was settling over the neighborhood, and warm light spilled from the large front windows of the 3-story townhouse, the same house she'd helped make possible. Several cars lined their driveway. Through the expansive dining room window, she could see them all gathered around the mahogany table she'd helped Anthony pick out last Christmas. There was Anthony at the head of the table, gesturing animatedly as he told some story. Patricia sat beside him, laughing, her hand resting on his arm. Eric and Lisa flanked Patricia's parents, everyone leaning in with rapt attention. It was the picture of a perfect family dinner, the important dinner, the one she'd been deliberately excluded from. She watched for several more minutes, torturing herself with the scene of warmth and togetherness that she was not part of. When Patricia's father raised his glass in what appeared to be a toast, Margaret couldn't bear to watch anymore. She started the engine and drove home through streets that seemed darker than usual. Back in her living room, She sat down heavily in Alexander's old recliner. Her gaze fell on the glossy brochure still sitting on the coffee table. Riverside Estates, where luxury meets tranquility. The three-story townhouse by the river with its private dock and manicured gardens. The house she had contributed $320,000 toward just 6 months ago, depleting a significant portion of her savings. "Mum, it's an investment for all of us," Anthony had said, his voice warm with enthusiasm. "The place is big enough that there'll always be a corner for you too. You could even have your own suite upstairs." My suite. Apparently both had vanished along with her welcome. She remembered that day at the bank, sitting across from Mr. Peterson, the loan officer. He'd reviewed her financial documents with a furrowed brow. "Are you certain about this, Mrs. Richardson? It's a substantial sum. Have you considered keeping more in reserve for your own future needs?" But she had been certain. Alexander had been a prudent man, a good provider. He'd left her comfortable, secure. She wanted to help her son build his future, create something lasting for the grandchildren. That was what mothers did, wasn't it? The requests had started small after that. A safer car for the grandchildren. Eric had just gotten his license and Patricia worried about him driving the old Honda. "Just until we can afford something better ourselves, Mum." $5,000. Then private school tuition for Eric. He had learning differences that required specialized attention, and the public school wasn't equipped to help him reach his potential. $12,000 a year. The kitchen renovation came next. Patricia deserved a beautiful space. She worked such long hours and came home exhausted. $28,000 for custom cabinets and granite countertops. Each time, Margaret had quietly written the checks. Each time believing she was investing in her family's happiness and future. Each time, Anthony's gratitude had seemed genuine, his hugs warm and lingering. And what had she received in return? Scheduled phone calls on holidays. Brief, dutiful visits, where Patricia checked her watch and the grandchildren seemed eager to leave. And now this. Margaret stood and walked to her mahogany desk, a wedding gift from Alexander's parents 49 years ago. The top drawer contained her meticulously organized files: bills, receipts, insurance documents, tax records. Anthony's folder was by far the thickest, bulging with cancelled checks and financial documents that told the story of her generosity. She opened it with shaking hands. A check stub for $23,000 for the landscaping business Anthony had started and abandoned after 6 months. Payment receipts for Patricia's MBA program. $8,000. Roof repair on their old house before the move. $6,000. Eric's car insurance premiums, which she'd agreed to cover temporarily. Ongoing monthly payments of $400. Private orthodontic work for both grandchildren, $12,000. The papers scattered across her desk like evidence in a trial. She couldn't calculate the total without a calculator, but she knew it was well into 6 figures. All of it given freely, lovingly, believing she was helping build something beautiful for her family. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Her heart jumped, hoping it might be Anthony calling to explain, but the caller ID showed Lisa's name. "Hi, Grandma." Lisa's voice was bright and cheerful. "I'm on my way home. Are you coming tonight? I miss you so much." Margaret's throat tightened. Lisa had always been different from the rest of them. Genuine, even when everyone else seemed to forget she existed. Lisa found time to call, to visit, to remember her birthday without prompting. "Oh, sunshine," Margaret said, forcing her voice to sound normal. "I'm not feeling very well today. I decided to skip dinner and stay home." "What? What's wrong? Are you sick?" ... Margaret closed her eyes, hating herself for lying to the one person who truly cared. "Just a bit under the weather, dear. Nothing serious. But Dad said you absolutely had to come tonight. He said there was important news. I don't understand. Your father changed his mind, Margaret said gently. That doesn't sound like Dad. And you sound funny, Grandma. I'm worried about you. Look, I'm only 10 minutes away from your place. Let me come over and take care of you. I can make you some tea or soup or... No, sweetheart, Margaret interrupted, her voice firmer than she intended. You should go home and have some family time. Enjoy your evening with everyone. Grandma. Lisa, please, I'll be fine. I just need to rest. You go home and have a wonderful dinner. We'll talk tomorrow. I promise. After hanging up, Margaret sat in the quiet for several minutes. Lisa didn't know she hadn't been invited. Margaret picked up her phone and dialed Wells Fargo, while the representative asked the standard security questions. A plan formed in Margaret's mind. Calm, cold, and crystal clear. I want to stop all automatic payments from my account. Everything, without exception. And I need to cancel the power of attorney for my son, Anthony Richardson. A pause on the other end of the line. All automatic payments, ma'am. Are you certain? I show quite a few recurring transactions on your account. I know exactly what's there. Stop everything today. I can temporarily suspend the payments tonight, but for permanent cancellation and to revoke the power of attorney, you'll need to come in with proper identification and sign the documents in person. That's fine. Please suspend them all immediately. Margaret could hear typing on the other end. She looked at Alexander's photograph while she waited. You were right, Alex, she whispered. You can't let people walk all over you, even your own family. All right, Mrs. Richardson. I have everything ready. I'm showing 174 recurring transfers and automatic payments that have been temporarily suspended, effective immediately. 174, Margaret repeated quietly. She had never imagined there were so many. How had it gotten to this point without her realizing? Is there anything else I can help you with tonight? No, that's everything. Thank you. You're welcome. Have a good evening, and we'll see you tomorrow. After ending the call, Margaret sat in her chair for a long time, completely motionless. Her hands trembled slightly, but inside she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of calm control, as if a crushing weight she'd carried on her shoulders had suddenly been lifted. Lisa pushed through the front door of her parents' house, her cheeks flushed from the cool evening air. The warmth hit her immediately, not just the physical warmth from the heating, but the emotional warmth of celebration. Candles flickered on the dining room table and the good china was set out. Her parents looked unusually animated, practically glowing with excitement. There she is, Anthony called out, rising from his chair with a wide grin. Our college girl. Lisa stopped in her tracks, confused. What are you talking about? Patricia rushed over, waving an official-looking envelope. Sweetheart, we couldn't help ourselves. When this came in the mail today, we just had to open it. We were too excited to wait. Lisa's heart began to race as she recognized the university letterhead. Stanford. The letter she'd been waiting for, hoping for, dreading to receive. She'd applied months ago, knowing the acceptance rate was impossibly low, but her guidance counselor had encouraged her to try. I got in, she whispered, taking the letter with trembling hands. You got in, Anthony boomed, pulling her into a bear hug. Stanford University. Our daughter is going to Stanford. Lisa scanned the letter quickly, her eyes filling with tears. It was real. She'd actually been accepted to her dream school. All those late nights studying, the volunteer work, the SAT prep courses, it had all paid off. Patricia's parents, whom Lisa had barely noticed in her excitement, approached with warm smiles. Her maternal grandfather, Robert, clapped her on the shoulder. "Congratulations, dear. We're so proud of you. You have a bright future ahead." Her grandmother, Eleanor, nodded approvingly. "Such an achievement. Patricia, you and Anthony must be thrilled." Lisa accepted their congratulations graciously, but something felt incomplete about the celebration. "We have to call Grandma Margaret. She needs to know right away. She'll be so excited." Lisa put the phone down. Patricia interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut through the celebration. Lisa looked up, startled by her mother's tone. "What? But she should be here. She would want to know. Even if she's not feeling well, we should—" "There's no need to bother her tonight," Patricia said firmly, crossing her arms. Something in her mother's expression made Lisa's stomach tighten. "Mom, what's going on? Why are you being weird about this?" Patricia exchanged a look with Anthony, who suddenly found his wineglass very interesting. "I'm not being weird. I just think we should let your grandmother rest." Something was very wrong here. Her mother's forced smile, her father's inability to meet her eyes, the tension that had suddenly filled the room despite the celebration. "Did you even invite her to dinner tonight?" Lisa asked slowly. The silence that followed was deafening. "Oh my God," Lisa breathed. "You didn't invite her." "Lisa?" Anthony began. "No, no!" Lisa's voice rose. "Don't Lisa me! You deliberately excluded her from my acceptance celebration? Are you kidding me right now?" Patricia's mask slipped completely. "Look, honey, sometimes family gatherings are just easier when—" "Easier when what? When you don't have to pretend to care about the woman who raised Dad? The woman who's been nothing but generous and kind to all of us? You don't understand the dynamics." "I understand perfectly." Lisa's voice cracked with emotion. "I understand that you decided my grandmother wasn't worth including in one of the most important moments of my life." The argument escalated quickly. Patricia tried to justify her decision, claiming Margaret could be difficult, and that they wanted the evening to be stress-free. Anthony weakly attempted to mediate, but his half-hearted explanations only made Lisa angrier. "This is unbelievable," Lisa said, turning to her maternal grandparents. "Did either of you say anything? Did you ask where she was?" Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we assumed there was a reason." "A reason?" Lisa's voice was incredulous. "The reason is that Mom decided to exclude her, and none of you cared enough to question it." Eleanor spoke up defensively. "Dear, we don't want to interfere in your parents' decisions." "Interfere? She's family. She's been more of a grandmother to me than—" Lisa caught herself, but the damage was done. She took a deep breath, her anger crystallizing into something clearer and more focused. "Than either of you have ever been. Do you want to know the truth? Grandma Margaret is the one who paid for my SAT prep courses. She's the one who drove me to college interviews when Dad was too busy with work. She's the one who truly believes in my education." The room fell silent except for the sound of Patricia's sharp intake of breath. Lisa continued, her voice gaining strength. "She's given this family everything: money, time, love, support. And this is how you repay her?" "Lisa, you're being dramatic," Patricia began. Lisa laughed bitterly. "I'm being honest, something none of you seem capable of. You sit here in this beautiful house that she helped buy, planning my future with money she's contributing, and you can't even be bothered to include her in the celebration." She looked around the room at the faces of her family. Her father's guilty expression, her mother's defensive anger, her maternal grandparents' uncomfortable silence. "You know what? You're all shameless," she said quietly, the word landing like a slap. "Absolutely shameless." Lisa grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Anthony called after her. "To see the one person in this family who actually deserves to celebrate with me tonight." Lisa shot back. Lisa, don't be ridiculous. Come back here right now, Patricia demanded. But Lisa was already out the door, her car keys in her hand. She had never been more disgusted with her family, and she had never been more determined to make things right. As she started her car, she could see them through the window, still gathered around the dining room table, the celebration continuing without her. The drive to Margaret's apartment had never felt more urgent or more necessary. Her heart was still pounding from the confrontation at home, but now it raced for a different reason. Anticipation of sharing her incredible news with the one person who would truly understand what it meant. She knocked gently on Margaret's door, not wanting to startle her if she really wasn't feeling well. When the door opened, Margaret's surprised face appeared, still wearing the navy blue dress she'd chosen so carefully hours earlier.
Lisa, sweetheart, what are you doing here?
Without a word, Lisa stepped forward and wrapped her grandmother in a quiet, tight hug. She held on longer than usual, breathing in the familiar scent of Margaret's lavender perfume and feeling the steady comfort of her embrace.
I love you so much, Grandma,
Lisa whispered into her shoulder. Margaret pulled back, concerned. What's wrong, Sunshine? You're trembling. Oh. Lisa wiped her eyes and smiled through her emotions. Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually. She reached into her purse and pulled out the slightly crumpled envelope. Look what came today. Margaret's eyes widened as she recognized the Stanford University letterhead. With shaking hands, she took the letter and read it carefully, her expression transforming from confusion to amazement to pure, radiant joy. Oh my goodness, Margaret breathed, pressing the letter to her chest. She pulled Lisa into another hug, this one fierce with pride and excitement. This is incredible news. I'm so proud of you. All those late nights studying, all that hard work, it paid off. Lisa beamed, feeling the genuine warmth and enthusiasm she'd been craving all evening. This was the reaction she'd been hoping for, the celebration that felt real and meaningful. But then Margaret's expression shifted, a shadow crossing her face. She glanced toward the door, then back at Lisa with growing confusion. Wait, Margaret said slowly. Did you tell your parents about this yet? Are they waiting for you at home? Lisa rolled her eyes and let out a bitter laugh. Oh, they already know. They couldn't help themselves. They opened the letter the moment it arrived in the mail. They opened your letter? Margaret asked, though that wasn't what was bothering her most. They were too excited to wait for me to get back from my trip, Lisa explained. The whole celebration tonight was about the acceptance. They had the good china out, candles and everything. She trailed off, watching her grandmother's face carefully. The important news. The dinner she absolutely had to attend. The celebration that was so crucial they'd insisted she come. Right up until they decided she wasn't welcome. Margaret sank into her chair, the full weight of the betrayal settling over her like a heavy blanket. Lisa studied her grandmother's face carefully, noting the way Margaret's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the subtle slump in her shoulders, despite her attempt to appear cheerful. Grandma, Lisa said firmly, I don't want to think about whatever drama went down at home. I want to celebrate properly with the person who actually deserves to share this moment with me. Margaret started to protest. Oh, sweetheart, you should go back to your family. They're probably worried. They can worry, Lisa interrupted with a mischievous grin. An hour later, Margaret found herself sitting across from Lisa at Bella Vista, one of the city's most elegant restaurants, perched on the 20th floor of the downtown Marriott. The maitre d' had initially given them a skeptical look when Lisa, still in her casual travel clothes, had confidently requested their best table, he'd said with practiced politeness. Lisa had straightened her shoulders and smiled sweetly. That's interesting because I called an hour ago and spoke to someone named James who assured me you could accommodate a celebration for a new Stanford student and her grandmother. Margaret watched in amazement as her 19-year-old granddaughter transformed into a confident young woman who clearly knew how to handle herself. The maitre d's attitude shifted immediately. Of course. You must be Miss Richardson. Right this way, please. As they were seated at a stunning corner table with panoramic city views, Margaret whispered, "You didn't actually call ahead, did you?" Lisa winked. "Nope, but confidence is everything, Grandma. You taught me that." The evening unfolded like something from a movie. They ordered champagne, Margaret initially protesting that it was too expensive, until Lisa reminded her they were celebrating Stanford, and shared stories Margaret hadn't thought about in years. After dinner, Lisa announced their next destination. The Underground was everything Margaret hadn't expected. Instead of a dingy basement bar, it was a warm, intimate venue with exposed brick walls, vintage posters, and tables lit by flickering candles. The crowd was diverse. College students mixed with professionals, young couples alongside older music lovers. Margaret felt overdressed in her navy blue dinner dress until she noticed several other elegantly dressed women of various ages clearly enjoying themselves. The band was just setting up when they arrived. Lisa somehow managed to secure a small table near the stage, and Margaret found herself nursing a glass of red wine while her granddaughter ordered something called a Stanford Slam that arrived bright red with far too many garnishes. The music started before Margaret could respond. A smooth, soulful blues number that filled the room with rich, warm sound. Margaret found herself relaxing for the first time all evening, her shoulders dropping as the music washed over her. By the time they left the Underground at nearly midnight, Margaret felt like a completely different person from the woman who'd sat alone in her apartment earlier that evening, staring at Alexander's photograph and feeling forgotten. As they drove home through the quiet streets, both women were tired but exhilarated. "That was incredible," Lisa said, glancing at her grandmother. "You were incredible. Did you see how Bobby looked at you?" Margaret smiled, her cheeks still pink from the evening's excitement. "I can't believe we did that. I can't believe you made me do that." "I didn't make you do anything. I just reminded you that you're more than what everyone else expects you to be." They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Margaret spoke again. "Thank you, Sunshine, for everything tonight, for celebrating with me, for getting me out of my own head." As they pulled into Margaret's parking lot, both women knew something had shifted. As they sat in the car, neither woman made a move to get out. The engine was off, but the warmth from their evening together still filled the space between them. Margaret looked at Lisa's profile, illuminated by the soft glow of the streetlight, and felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of a knot she'd carried for nearly 2 decades. "Lisa," Margaret said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made her granddaughter turn immediately. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago, but I kept putting it off, thinking maybe it wasn't my place, or maybe it would hurt you, or maybe—" She trailed off, her hands fidgeting with her purse strap. Lisa's eyes widened with curiosity and concern. "What is it, Grandma? You're scaring me a little." Margaret took a deep breath, drawing strength from the memory of the evening they'd just shared. Lisa's confidence at the restaurant, her joy at the jazz club, the way she'd orchestrated their entire adventure with such maturity and love. "It's about when you were born," Margaret began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "About the months before you came into this world." Lisa shifted in her seat to face her grandmother fully. "Okay, I'm listening." 19 years ago, when your mother found out she was pregnant with you, Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. She didn't want to keep the baby. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Lisa's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then a slow, dawning understanding that made Margaret's heart ache. She wanted to terminate the pregnancy, Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger now that the secret was finally being released. She had all sorts of reasons. Said it would be too hard financially to support 2 children. Said Eric needed all their attention because of his learning differences. Said she wasn't ready for another baby, that her career was just getting started, that they couldn't afford daycare for 2 kids. Lisa's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "But I'm here," Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. "So what happened?" Margaret smiled sadly. She leaned back in her seat, remembering that terrible spring when everything had changed. Patricia had already made the appointment. It was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I remember because I'd been babysitting Eric, and he kept asking why Mommy was crying all the time. I didn't know what to tell him. He was only 5. Margaret's eyes grew distant as she recalled those agonizing weeks. The night before the appointment, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Alexander, about how he'd always said every child was a blessing, how he'd been so devastated when we lost our first pregnancy before Anthony came along. I thought about all the joy children bring, all the potential, all the love they add to a family. And I thought about you, even though you were just a cluster of cells then. I thought about who you might become. Lisa was completely still, hanging on every word. So at 6 in the morning, I drove to their house. I let myself in with my key and found Patricia sitting at the kitchen table, still in her robe, staring at a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Anthony had already left for work. I think he couldn't handle being there. Margaret could see it all so clearly: Patricia's tear-stained face, the appointment cards sitting on the counter, the way the morning light had filtered through their kitchen window. I sat down next to her and said, "Patricia, I need to ask you something. If money wasn't an issue, if you had all the support you needed, would you want this baby?" "What did she say?" Lisa asked, her voice tight. She started crying, really crying, and she said, "Margaret, I'm so scared. What if I can't love 2 children equally? What if I'm not enough? What if this ruins everything?" Margaret paused, remembering Patricia's vulnerability in that moment. And I realized she wasn't cold or calculating. She was terrified. Margaret reached over and took Lisa's hand. "So I made her a promise. I told her that if she had this baby, I would help with everything. Financially, emotionally, practically, whatever she needed. I told her I'd help with daycare costs, with babysitting, with anything that came up. I promised her that this child would be wanted and loved and supported, no matter what." "And she agreed?" "Not immediately. She called your father home from work, and we had what you might call a family meeting. Anthony was upset that I'd interfered, said it wasn't my business, that I was manipulating Patricia when she was vulnerable. Patricia's parents, when they found out, were furious with me. They said I was being selfish, that I was putting my desire for another grandchild above their daughter's well-being." Margaret's voice grew heavier. "The whole family turned against me. Your father didn't speak to me for 3 months. Patricia's parents convinced her I was trying to control her life. Even Eric sensed the tension. He started having nightmares and acting out at school." Lisa squeezed her grandmother's hand, but she had me anyway. She cancelled the appointment that afternoon. But the damage to our family relationships was done. I think that's when everything changed between us, when the shift started. Before that, I felt like I was part of the family. After that, I became tolerated. included out of obligation rather than genuine affection. The pieces were falling into place for Lisa, and Margaret could see the recognition dawning in her eyes. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. I always wondered why she seemed so much warmer with Eric. I thought maybe it was because he needed more attention, or because they had that special bond since he was the first. Oh, sweetheart. Margaret's heart broke for the confusion Lisa must have carried all these years. It had nothing to do with you. You were an absolute joy from the moment you were born. You were the easiest baby, the sweetest toddler, the most considerate child. You excelled at everything you tried. You were kind to everyone you met. You brought nothing but happiness wherever you went. Then why? Because every time you succeeded, every time you showed what a wonderful person you were becoming, it reminded her that she'd almost made a different choice. Instead of feeling proud, I think she felt guilty, and maybe a little resentful that I'd been right. Margaret pulled Lisa into her arms, feeling her granddaughter's shoulders shake with the weight of years of misplaced self-doubt. Lisa was quiet for a long moment, staring out the windshield at the empty street. When she spoke again, her voice was different, steadier, more mature. All those times she undermined my confidence, all those little comments about how I should be more realistic about my goals, how I shouldn't get my hopes up too high. Lisa's voice grew stronger. She was trying to make her original instinct right. She was hoping I'd fail, so she could justify having wanted to terminate the pregnancy. I don't know if it was conscious, Margaret said gently. I think she genuinely loves you now. But I do think there's always been this underlying resentment, this sense that I forced her into a decision she wasn't ready for. But you didn't force her. You offered her support and showed her another option. That's how I saw it. But she may have felt pressured, manipulated even. Family dynamics are complicated, sweetheart. People can hold on to resentments for decades, especially when they feel their autonomy was challenged. Margaret watched her granddaughter work through years of memories with this new lens. Seeing the recognition and understanding replace confusion and self-doubt. And Dad? Lisa asked. Where was he in all this? Your father felt guilty, I think. Guilty for not standing up to me. Guilty for not supporting Patricia more strongly. Guilty for being relieved when she decided to have you. So he overcompensated by always taking her side in family decisions, even when it meant excluding me or being less supportive of you than he might have been otherwise. Lisa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know whether to be angry or sad or relieved that I finally understand. The car was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the comfortable exhaustion of their adventure, but the profound quiet that follows a revelation that changes everything. Finally, Lisa spoke. Thank you for fighting for me. Thank you for making sure I existed. Margaret squeezed her hand. Thank you for proving every day that it was the right fight to have. As they finally got out of the car and walked toward Margaret's apartment building, both women knew that their relationship had shifted again. They were no longer just grandmother and granddaughter. They were allies who'd been through something together, who understood each other in a way that few people ever do. Margaret was still in her robe, savouring her first cup of coffee and the lingering warmth from the previous evening's adventure with Lisa, when her phone rang at 7:30 a.m. The caller ID showed Anthony's name, and for a brief moment she wondered if he was calling to apologise for the dinner debacle. Perhaps Lisa had talked sense into him when she got home. Good morning, Anthony, she said, settling back into her kitchen chair. Mum, we need to talk. His voice was tight, strained in a way that immediately put her on guard. I got some calls this morning from the bank, from the insurance company. They're saying payments have been cancelled or suspended. There seems to be some kind of problem with your account. Margaret took a slow sip of her coffee, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. There's no problem with my account, dear. Everything is working exactly as intended. What do you mean? Anthony's voice rose slightly. Mom, they're saying you cancelled everything. The tuition payments, the insurance premiums, the mortgage assistance, everything. That can't be right. Oh, but it is right, Margaret said calmly. I called Wells Fargo yesterday evening and suspended all automatic payments. I'll be going in today to make the cancellations permanent. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Anthony spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. The tone he used when he was trying very hard not to lose his temper. Mom, I don't understand. Why would you do that? Is this about last night? Because if you're upset about the dinner cancellation, we can talk about that, but this seems like an extreme reaction. Margaret laughed. Actually laughed, and the sound seemed to startle Anthony into silence. An extreme reaction, she repeated, Stulens. Mom, we've always been grateful. Have you? Because last night I didn't feel very appreciated. She heard muffled voices in the background. Anthony clearly talking to someone else. Then Patricia's voice came on the line, sharp and immediately confrontational. Margaret, this isn't funny. You can't just cut us off like this. We have obligations, commitments that depend on your support. Margaret felt her amusement evaporate, replaced by a cold clarity she hadn't experienced in years. Hello, Patricia. How lovely to hear from you so early in the morning. Don't be sarcastic with me, Patricia snapped. We need to fix this right now. Eric's tuition payment is due next week and the insurance company is already sending notices. You can't just throw a tantrum and put our family at risk. A tantrum? Margaret's voice remained perfectly calm, which seemed to unnerve Patricia even more. I prefer to think of it as a business decision. I'm simply reallocating my resources. This is ridiculous, Margaret. After everything we've done for you. After all the dinners we've included you in. All the holidays. After everything you've done for me? Margaret interrupted, her voice still deadly quiet. Patricia, perhaps you'd like to tell me exactly what you've done for me lately. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I've been funding your lifestyle while being treated like an inconvenient obligation. That's not true, and you know it. We care about you. Do you? Silence on the other end of the line. Margaret, you don't understand the full situation. I understand. Patricia's voice grew harder, more demanding. Look, Margaret, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this needs to stop. We have financial obligations that we entered into based on your promised support. You can't just change the rules in the middle of the game. Promise support? Margaret's eyebrows rose. I don't recall signing any contracts, Patricia. Every contribution I made was a gift, freely given out of love for my family. Patricia's voice took on a threatening edge that made Margaret sit up straighter. Margaret, if you don't reverse this immediately, there will be consequences. We won't be able to maintain the same relationship with you. You'll be cutting yourself off from your own family. Margaret stared at the phone, genuinely shocked by the naked manipulation in Patricia's voice. After a moment, she began to laugh again, but this time it was different, sharper, more incredulous. Let me understand this correctly, Patricia. You're actually trying to blackmail me with access to my own family? I'm not threatening anything. I'm simply explaining the reality of the situation. The reality, Margaret said, her voice cutting through Patricia's excuses like ice, is that you've just shown me exactly who you really are. And frankly, Patricia, I'm appalled by the audacity. Margaret, don't be unreasonable. No, Patricia, this conversation is long overdue. Margaret could hear Anthony in the background, trying to take the phone back. But Patricia's voice continued, growing more desperate and angry. You're making a huge mistake, Margaret. We won't forget this. The family won't forget this. That was the moment Margaret realized she was done. Completely, utterly done. Goodbye, Patricia, she said quietly and hung up the phone.
Lisa's first semester at Stanford flew by in a whirlwind of lectures, late-night study sessions, and the intoxicating freedom of college life. She called Margaret almost every evening, her voice bubbling with excitement as she described her professors, her dorm mates, the campus traditions she was discovering.
Grandma, you wouldn't believe the library here.
Lisa gushed during one October call.
It's like a cathedral but filled with books instead of prayers. I found this perfect study spot on the 4th floor where you can see the entire quad.
Margaret smiled, settling deeper into Alexander's old recliner with her evening tea. These phone calls had become the highlight of her days. Are you eating enough? Making friends? Yes, and yes. My roommate Sarah is from Oregon, and she's pre-med too. We study together almost every night. Oh, and Grandma, I joined the Jazz Appreciation Club. They meet every Thursday night to listen to records and discuss different artists. I thought of you and Bobby when I signed up. Bobby. Margaret's cheeks warmed at the mention of his name. They'd been on several dates since that magical night at the Underground. Dinner, the jazz festival he'd promised, long walks through the botanical gardens. He was patient, kind, and made her laugh in ways she'd forgotten were possible. How is Bobby? Lisa asked, as if reading her thoughts. He's well. We're going to see a Miles Davis tribute concert next weekend. I'm so happy for you, Grandma. You deserve all the joy in the world. As autumn melted into winter, their conversations began to shift. Lisa still shared her academic triumphs and social adventures, but she started mentioning home more often. Mum seems tired lately, Lisa said during a December call. Dad says she's just been working too hard, but she looks pale, really pale. Margaret felt a flicker of concern, but she pushed it aside. Patricia's health wasn't her responsibility anymore, not after the harsh words they'd exchanged months earlier. The family had made their position clear. 3,000. By February, Lisa's worry had intensified. Grandma, I'm scared. Mum has lost so much weight and she's been having these terrible headaches. Dad keeps saying it's just stress, but I think there's something really wrong. 3 weeks later, Lisa's call came at 2 a.m., her voice raw with panic. Grandma, I'm at the hospital. Mum collapsed at work, and they rushed her to the emergency room. The doctors are running tests, but they think... Her voice broke. They think it might be cancer. Margaret sat bolt upright in bed, her heart pounding. Which hospital, sweetheart? St. Mary's. Dad's here, but he's falling apart. Eric drove down from Sacramento. I don't know what to do. I'm coming, Margaret said, already reaching for her clothes. I'll be there in 40 minutes. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. Margaret couldn't explain the overwhelming urge she felt to be there, to help, despite everything that had happened between them. Maybe it was maternal instinct. Patricia was, after all, the mother of her grandchildren. Maybe it was simple human decency. Or maybe it was the voice of Alexander in her mind, reminding her that family bonds run deeper than anger. She found them in the intensive care waiting room. Anthony slumped in a plastic chair, his face grey with exhaustion. Eric pacing by the windows. Lisa curled up on a bench, her eyes red from crying. They all looked up when she appeared in the doorway, surprise flickering across their faces. Mum, Anthony said, his voice cracking. You came. Of course I came, Margaret said simply, settling beside Lisa and pulling her into her arms. How is she? The diagnosis came 2 days later. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Aggressive and already spreading. The oncologist's words hit the family like physical blows. Chemotherapy, radiation, surgery if they were lucky. A 50% 5-year survival rate, if everything went perfectly.
Margaret found herself moving through the crisis with a clarity that surprised everyone, including herself. She coordinated with doctors, researched treatment options, arranged for the best specialists money could buy. When Anthony's insurance proved inadequate for the experimental treatments that offered the most hope, Margaret quietly covered the difference, without being asked. During Patricia's first post-surgery visit, Margaret walked into the hospital room carrying a bouquet of white roses and found her daughter-in-law looking smaller and more vulnerable than she'd ever imagined possible. Patricia's hair was covered by a soft blue scarf, her cheeks hollow, her hands thin and pale against the white blanket. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them. An unspoken acknowledgement that their previous conflicts seemed insignificant in the face of this new reality. "Hello, Patricia," Margaret said gently, approaching the bed. "Margaret!" Patricia's voice was weak but carried a note of genuine gratitude. "Thank you for coming." From that moment forward, they operated as if nothing bad had ever happened between them. Margaret appeared at every chemotherapy session, bringing books, magazines, and homemade soup in thermos containers. She drove Patricia to appointments when Anthony couldn't leave work, sat with her during the long hours when nausea made conversation impossible, and slowly, carefully, began rebuilding a relationship that had been broken for too long. As the months passed and Patricia's condition worsened before the treatments began to take effect, Margaret watched her daughter-in-law's entire demeanour transform. The entitled, demanding woman who had threatened to keep the grandchildren away was replaced by someone humbled by mortality, grateful for every kindness, aware of how precious and fragile family bonds truly were. Patricia never asked about the cancelled payments, never demanded explanations for Margaret's previous actions. Instead, she seemed to understand that Margaret's presence was a gift, freely given despite their history. One evening in late spring, after Patricia had been through 6 months of treatment, Margaret found her daughter-in-law sitting in the hospital garden, her scarf replaced by a thin covering of new hair growth. The sunset painted everything in soft golden light, and for the first time in months, Patricia looked peaceful. "The doctors say the latest scans look promising," Patricia said as Margaret joined her on the bench. "That's wonderful news," Margaret replied, settling beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the evening light fade. Finally, Patricia spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "I've been thinking about Lisa," she said. "About the choice I almost made 19 years ago." Margaret's breath caught, but she remained silent. She told me you know, about the pregnancy, about what I wanted to do." Patricia's voice was steady but full of emotion. She said you told her the whole story. "I thought she had a right to understand," Margaret said carefully. "She did, and I'm glad she knows, because it means she understands how much you fought for her, how much you've always fought for all of us, even when we didn't deserve it." Patricia turned to face Margaret, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I want to thank you, not just for fighting for Lisa, but for fighting for me these past months. I know I didn't earn your kindness. I know I was terrible to you, ungrateful and demanding and—" She paused, struggling with the words. "I was so threatened by how much the children loved you, by how effortlessly you gave them what I couldn't. Instead of being grateful for the extra love in their lives, I saw you as competition." Margaret reached over and took Patricia's hand. "You don't need to.
Yes, I do, Patricia interrupted gently. I need to say this while I have the chance. You could have walked away after our last phone call. You had every right to let us handle this crisis on our own. But you didn't. You showed up anyway. And you've been showing up every day since. Tears were flowing freely down Patricia's cheeks now. I'm sorry, Margaret. I'm sorry for everything. Sorry for taking your generosity for granted. Sorry for threatening you when you tried to establish boundaries. I'm sorry for wasting so many years being jealous of the woman who only ever wanted to love our family. Margaret felt her own tears starting. Patricia, we all make mistakes. What matters is that we're here now, together. I want things to be different going forward, Patricia said firmly. I want you to know that you're not just welcome in our family, you're essential to it. Lisa adores you. Eric needs your wisdom. Anthony has always needed his mother, even when he was too proud to admit it. And I need your friendship. They embraced there in the fading light, two women who had found their way back to each other through the most unlikely circumstances. The following months brought more treatments, more scans, more anxious waiting for results. But they also brought family dinners where Margaret sat at the head of the table, grandchildren's visits that lasted entire weekends, and a growing closeness between all of them that felt more genuine than anything they'd shared before. 2 years after that first terrifying diagnosis, the doctors delivered the news they'd all been hoping for. Patricia's cancer was in complete remission. The latest scans showed no trace of disease, and while she would need regular monitoring, her prognosis was excellent. When Patricia's final clear scan was confirmed, Margaret was sitting in her living room with Bobby, sharing their usual Sunday afternoon tea and jazz records, when her phone rang. It was Patricia, and there was something different in her voice, an excitement that Margaret hadn't heard since before the illness. Margaret, I need you to come over right away and bring Bobby if he's there. I have something to show you. Is everything all right? Margaret asked, immediately concerned. Any unexpected call still triggered her protective instincts. Everything's perfect. Just come, please. 30 minutes later, Margaret and Bobby stood on the familiar front porch of the house she'd helped purchase years ago. Patricia opened the door before they could knock, her face glowing with health and barely contained excitement. Her hair had grown back thicker than before, and she'd regained the weight she'd lost during treatment. She looked, Margaret realized with a start, happier than she'd ever seen her. Come in, Patricia said, practically bouncing on her feet. Anthony's in the living room and the kids are coming over in an hour. I wanted to show you first. She led them through the house, but instead of stopping in the living room, where Anthony waited with an equally mysterious smile, she continued toward the back of the house, to what had once been a spare room they'd used for storage. Patricia, what? Margaret began, but her words died as Patricia opened the door. The room had been completely transformed. What had once been a cluttered space filled with holiday decorations and old furniture was now a bright, airy studio. Natural lights streamed through new skylights, illuminating professional photography equipment, developing trays and enlargers. The walls were lined with Margaret's photographs, images Margaret recognized as her own work from decades ago, pictures she'd thought were lost forever. But it wasn't just the old photographs. There were new ones too. Portraits Patricia had clearly taken of Margaret over the past months without her knowing. Margaret working in her garden, reading in her favourite chair, laughing with Bobby at the jazz club, hugging Lisa at the hospital during one of Patricia's treatments. Each image captured something beautiful and essential about who Margaret was, seen through eyes that had finally learned to truly see her. I don't understand, Margaret whispered, stepping into the room as if entering a dream.
Patricia moved to stand beside her, her voice soft with emotion. During my treatment, when I had all those hours sitting in waiting rooms and lying in hospital beds, I started thinking about everything you'd sacrificed over the years. Your dreams, your passions, your own life. You put it all aside to take care of everyone else. She gestured toward an old camera mounted on a shelf, one Margaret recognized as the Leica she'd sold years ago to help pay for Anthony's college tuition. Anthony told me about your photography, about how talented you were before you became a full-time mother and grandmother. He said you used to develop your own film in your basement, that you had dreams of maybe opening a studio someday. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she moved through the space, touching the equipment, studying the photographs of herself that revealed Patricia's unexpected artistic eye. I tracked down your old camera. It took months, but I found the man you sold it to, and he agreed to sell it back. Then I took photography classes during my recovery. I wanted to understand what you'd given up, what you'd loved so much that you'd sacrificed for us. Bobby squeezed Margaret's hand as she struggled to find words. But this is more than just a studio, Patricia continued, her voice growing stronger. I talked to the family and we all agreed, we want you to move in with us, Margaret. Not as a guest, not temporarily, but permanently. This house is as much yours as it is ours. You helped make it possible, and you should be here. Anthony appeared in the doorway, his face reflecting the same mixture of joy and nervousness that Patricia's held. Mom, we converted the master suite upstairs into a complete apartment for you and Bobby, if you'll have us. Your own entrance, full kitchen, living space, complete independence. But you'd be part of our daily lives. We want Sunday dinners together, Patricia added quickly, and holidays as one big family. We want to babysit grandchildren in the same house where their grandmother lives. We want to stop visiting each other and start living together. Margaret sank into the chair Patricia had placed by the window, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were offering. I don't know what to say. Say yes, came Lisa's voice from the hallway. She appeared with Eric behind her, both of them grinning widely. Say yes, because I already picked out paint colours for your reading nook upstairs. And Eric has plans for a workshop where you and Bobby can restore vintage jazz records. You all planned this together? Margaret asked, looking around at the faces of her family. It was Patricia's idea, Anthony said, his voice thick with emotion. She came to us 6 months ago and said it was time to stop taking you for granted and start showing you how much you mean to us. Patricia knelt beside Margaret's chair, taking her hands. I've spent so much of my life being jealous of your place in this family that I forgot something important. There's room for all of us to love each other. I don't want to compete with you anymore, Margaret. I want to learn from you. I want my children to grow up in a house where their grandmother's wisdom is part of their daily lives. She gestured around the studio. And I want you to start taking pictures again. Real pictures, not just family snapshots. I want you to remember who you were before you became everyone else's caretaker. Bobby spoke for the first time since they'd arrived. Margaret, love, what do you think? Margaret looked around the room again, taking in every detail. The photographs that honoured both her past and her present. The equipment that represented a future she'd never dared to imagine, the faces of the family that had travelled such a long, difficult road to reach this moment of complete acceptance and love. I think, she said slowly, that Alexander would have loved this plan. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Margaret had ever experienced. They spent the afternoon planning the logistics of combining households, discussing how to merge their different routines and preferences into one harmonious life. Lisa talked about bringing college friends home to a house where multiple generations lived together. Eric shared his excitement about having built-in babysitters when he eventually had children of his own. Patricia showed Margaret every corner of the upstairs apartment they'd created, clearly having thought through every detail of Margaret's comfort and independence. There was a reading nook by the window, where Alexander's chair had been placed, a small kitchen equipped with Margaret's favourite tea collection, and a cosy living room where she and Bobby could entertain their own friends. As the sun set over their first official family meeting as housemates-to-be, Margaret realised that this was what healing looked like. Not just the absence of disease, but the presence of joy, the restoration of dreams, and the creation of something entirely new from the pieces of what had been broken.
They were no longer a family held together by obligation and financial dependence. They had become something rarer and more precious. A family chosen and built with intention, love, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from almost losing each other entirely. Margaret's story, which had begun with exclusion and ended with inclusion, was really just beginning. The best chapters, she realised, were still to be written.